So I'm going to go over color mixing here, and I'm going to explain the organization of the color mixing. First of all, here is the palette in organizational order. We have white, yellow, orange, red, deep red, a red purple, a deep blue, a light blue, or a cool blue, green, and black. So there's an orderliness to all of the colors that you're seeing here. And that's important that they always remain in the same orderliness, because this is a keyboard, right? This is a musical keyboard. And if the notes were always placed in different locations every time we went to strike the keys, we wouldn't know how to play the music. So the same thing applies to your palette. Your palette needs to be in an orderly manner, and it always needs to be arranged the same way. If we were to bend this into a circle, this would make a full, complete color wheel. Green next to yellow, then the blue, then the deep blue, then the purple. And the same with this order. They all go to this color right here, which is sort of the purple, even though it's not purple. It's the center of the color wheel on the opposite side of yellow. So everything has an orderliness to it. Black and white are the end caps. These are not colors. These are color adjusters. These do not have anything to do with the color organization. Your shader and your tinter. And then mixing them together, they're your toner. So white, gray, or black. The first color that I want to mix here is the background color. So because it's light, I want to start with white as opposed to the hue, because some of these colors from here to here especially, and this one, are really difficult to tint in a way where they are really light tinted colors. So I have to begin with this and then add little tiny bits of color into this to shift it. You can see just that little tiny bit polluted this color entirely. Now it is no longer white. You need a tiny bit more of it. And now it's starting to shift towards the color of the wall, but it's not yellowish, it's actually reddish. But there's a yellow base in there to prevent this from just going straight pink. It's preventing a pinkishness from occurring immediately. It's sort of buffering it. Now, to cool it off, because it is in a cool environment, I'm going to reach for the green and throw a little bit of that in there. This green has a kind of bluish base to it. So this is going to knock it down a little bit. As you can sort of see, it's shifting it in a cool direction. Now, as I add more color, it starts to drop in value. So now I'm going to put warm back into it at a darker value. And this is going to get us even closer to that wall color that we need. Every now and again, I'm going to take everything that's on my palette knife and scrape it off so that I have it in the pile instead of on the knife, which is also kind of important to do. So I would say that this is closer to the color that's on the left-hand side of the image. Now I need something that matches the right-hand side of the image. Now what I have done here by adding the green is I have sort of knocked it back a little bit. In fact, this is what I'm doing. This represents the color of the light. And I have to match this to this in value before I can mix them into one another. But there's light hitting the object. So for every color I want to make sure that I make the color of the lighting. And I'll add that to it, and you can see that neutralizes it a little bit more. And I didn't add a lot of this to it. I added just enough to knock it back. Now, it's starting to lose the reddishness. So I'm going to dip back into this, take a little tiny bit on the knife, and add that in. There's a lot of paint here. So I want to make sure it mixes into all the paint and not just the stuff that's on the surface. So I'm really banging the palette knife into the surface of this palette so that it really does mix everything up. Kind of like whipping eggs up into scrambled, right? You want to make sure that you really whip those things hard so that everything mixes together appropriately. So again, that's the color for the left-hand side of the wall. Now for the right-hand side, I'm going to start again with white, and I'm going to add just a tiny bit more complexion to this, starting with the orange to bring in the yellow base, because again, it's a warm wall. I'm going to take it a little bit more to darken the value. I want to make sure that this looks darker than this in value. Adding a little bit more. There we go. Now we can see that there's a clear distinction between the two of these. This is definitely darker in color value. All right, now I'm going to add red into it. And that's going to start shifting it towards the pink direction. And I want to maintain that darker value in the color. But as you can see between the two, one is clearly not the other anymore. One is warmer, the other is much, much cooler. And this does need to be cooled down a little bit, but I still need to shift it just a tiny bit more in the pink direction before I knock it back with the color of the light. All right, now we have a nice pink hue here. And almost all of it's mixed. You can still see some orange bits in there that I need to mix around a little bit more. All right, now that that has been adjusted, I can add the sky color in. Wiping the knife to make sure all the paint is off of it, thoroughly wiping it so that I don't end up with mud of any kind. Okay, now going into this, I'm going to add a little bit more to this pile here, but you can see a little goes a long way. That's darkened way too much. So now I need to lighten it and get it closer to the value that's over here. Scoop it up, organize it again, tint it. Now it's a lot closer to the other one. So now I'll just take a little bit of this and throw it in there, cleaning the knife off so I don't have all that extra paint. And then I'm going to mix this into each other. And you can see from that little puddle right there that this is definitely shifting in a cooler direction. And that again is the color of the wall with the sky influence, the light from the outside influence to it. Now I'm going to take this and I'm going to divide a portion of it away. And I'm going to add a tiny bit of red back into this. And these are the areas where the wall is less affected by the light. It's the lower right-hand corner of the background wall. Add a little bit more red. So now we have the really light wall getting darker, and then the lower corner that has less sky affecting it. So hopefully you're still following me here. What I'm doing is I'm mixing what you would call the local color first, and then I'm adding the color of the light into the pigment to shift it so that it leans into the direction of the environment light. Now I need to get another paper towel here. You're going to go through a lot of paper towels when you do this stuff, because to keep your brushes clean, to keep your palette knife clean, you have to wipe it continuously. All right, so the tabletop is a little bit more like this right here, but darker in value. It's a less red surface. I'm going to take white again to start off with. I'm going to take a little bit of this red instead of this red because it doesn't have the same intensity of red to it. Mix that in. And then I'm going to take some of this, lighten it up a little, so it's closer to this value. And then once they match, then I'm going to add the blue into it, which is going to cause it to shift in a sort of purplish direction. So it's no longer pure white, it has a purplishness to it. Now part of the wall is influencing the surface plane towards the back of the image. As it gets closer to us, it starts to shift in this kind of direction. I'm going to take this, slide it over to here, and then I'm going to mix another pile of it. I'm going to darken this down a little bit more. And this time I'm going to use blue because there's a lot of blue in the foreground. And this time, instead of using that red, I'm going to go back to this one. And it's not going to turn purple this time. It's going to remain Oh, well, it is a purple, but it's more like a mauve, an earth tone mauve. Mix a little bit of the sky color into it to see how close I am to matching it. And this is actually pretty close right here. I think I'm good with this for now, but I'm making sure again that the sky influence gets in there enough to distort the color so it doesn't end up reddish. See, everything that's in this picture has color to it, but everything in this picture is also influenced by the light source. So I'm just kind of making sure that the lighting is accurate to what we need to see here. All right, so that is the floor and that is the wall color. I'm now going to move into the objects that we're looking at. The first object I'm going to mix is the red ball color. Now there's three colors that are important here. The shadow side, the terminator, which is in the middle, and then the light side. So those three. I'm going to start with the terminator color. That's the one that's in the middle. Because it's darker, I'm going to begin with this and add the other colors into it. I'm going to take just a tiny bit of white and add it in. Now this is going to lighten it up a lot because this is one of those colors that white really influences. Although it is close, I'm going to add a little bit of this red into it to neutralize it from looking too purple. See how that shifts it back towards a deep red as opposed to looking purple? The purplishness is coming from the light source, the blue light hitting the surface. But I want to start with the ball color without the influence of light on it so that I can actually see the color that I'm making. Scrape all of that up together, pile it up. Then I'm going to cut a little bit of this away, slide it over here. I'm wondering if I should mix a little bit more. Yeah, you know what? I'm just going to leave it the way it is. Then I'm going to add a little bit of white. And I need to be careful how much I add into this. So I don't want it to shift too far. And that already looks really good as far as the lit side goes, the side where the lighting is affecting it. However, it's getting really pale. It's losing its chroma. That's going to happen from the light source hitting it. But I want this to go back towards the color of the ball before I distort it with the lighting. So the cadmium red, I'm not getting enough of this alizarin crimson. There we go. So now we can see the distinction between the two of those. There's definitely a value difference between them, and they both still look really colorful. If this gets too pale looking, it's going to feel grayish in relationship to this color right here, which is what I'm trying to avoid doing, making it look too gray. Okay, now I'm going to look for the shadow side. Now I'm doing this a little bit differently than what we saw in class because I want you to see the full range of colors, and I don't want to take all day on this. I want to make sure to get this done as quickly as possible. This is going to be a fairly long video, and I want to make sure to get through it as quickly and as safely as possible. Okay, so there's this. Now I'm going to add a little bit of green to it. If I add blue into it, it's going to shift it towards purple. The green, however, is a dark value, and it's not going to shift it towards purple. It's going to deepen the red. And that's the beauty of the Viridian green, is that it's not so powerful in its chroma that it causes huge distortions in the deeper, darker colors. It will, though, when you mix it with the lighter colors, it's going to make a really amazing green, but that's not what we're looking for right now. We're looking to actually look for the values that we need for the ball. And this looks pretty good right here. Now there's some areas that look black. That's a photo problem, not an actual lighting problem. We're going to leave this as is for now. That would be an occluded color, which means I would take this and darken it even further, probably with black as opposed to blue, so it doesn't shift it towards purple. But a little bit of blue might go into that color. However, I'd probably use the Viridian green again. All right, so there's those three hues. Now, sky color. Remember, this and this are both sky color. I have a lot of it over here. And what I'm doing is I'm mixing this down so that it gets closer to the value of this. I don't need it to be the exact value, although that wouldn't be a bad call. So there's a little trick here. If I make this exactly the same value, then it's going to shift this towards purple immediately. But if I make it lighter, that means there's more white in it, and the white is going to prevent the blue from being too colorful to shift this towards purple. So I'm actually going to put a little bit more white back into it. And yeah, there was a little bit of red on that, and I didn't mean to do that. I wasn't paying attention because I was talking to the camera, but that's okay. You can see that it hasn't distorted this color so much that we can't use it. Now I'm going to take a small portion of this and add it into here. It's probably more than I needed, but let's see what happens. All right, now that is looking a lot like the color that we see in the photograph, which is great. We have the sky mixed in with that purple, or the red. It is shifting it slightly towards a purple direction, but it's not extremely purple. And to neutralize that, I'm going to put a little bit of this red back in because it doesn't have blue in it. And that's going to turn it reddish again, just to make sure that it's not too purple. And you can see there's a big difference between both of those, although in the camera, it may not show that change very much. But I want to merge all of that back together to make sure I have enough color here. So this is the darker part, or the lighter part of the ball. Now the middle part of the ball, I'm going to take this and maybe add just a little bit more blue into it to darken it down a tiny bit more. But again, with that trick, I don't want to have so much blue in here that it's going to turn this purple all of a sudden. Take a tiny bit of that, mix it in with this, mix this up nicely, and you can see that that blue is fairly influential because we now have a purplish color all of a sudden. And we need to bring it back to red. So some of this with some of this. Cadmium's kind of winning here. I don't necessarily want it to be all cadmium influenced. So I'm going to pull a little bit more of this in. Now that's darkening the value maybe a little bit more than it needs to be, but there's that blue again. I just need a little tiny bit of it from over here to throw that in. And not only will it shift the temperature, but it'll also lighten the value a little. Now we have a manageable local color. Now the dark one. Now what do we do with this dark one? We leave it alone. Cool, direct light, warm, indirect light. We don't need to add anything to this to create distortion to it. Those are the three tones for the ball shape. The next color I'm going to do is the blue bottle. I'm going to start with this. Now you can see I've wiped the palette down as much as possible. This color is not going to distort this color in any way, shape, or form, so I'm not concerned with any kind of polluted tonality here. But I do wipe down the surface as much as possible before I start mixing things. Now that's already looking really good, but what I'm going to also do is add a tiny bit of this green into it to shift it ever so slightly. And that actually looks pretty good. Now the reason for adding that green is so it's not stark blue completely. There's a lot of color influence coming from the right hand side, and it's actually causing part of the shadow to look coolish. So I don't know exactly what's over there, but I'm trying to lean the colors a little bit more in the favor of what I see in the photo, as opposed to just assuming that it's a straight blue object with no distortion whatsoever. Now I need to do this again, but I need to make a lighter version. So I'm going to take this, lighten it up. Now there are two different bands of color on this side. There's a middle light and then a really bright light. And that's facing directly towards the light source. This is really close to the middle light. And it does have what looks like a tiny bit of red in it, but that would throw things off just enough because the direct lighting is cool, not warm. So I don't want to cause a problem with the temperature shifting in an awkward way by adding that red in. That's probably a photographic distortion, or maybe the influence of the indirect lighting, which is on the right side, not the left side. Now I can see a value shift between the two of these, but I do want to go just a little bit lighter with this still. A little bit more white. And now we have a big jump between those three values, and that is what we're looking for. Not a subtle jump, but a major visible jump between them. We can mix the edges in between to get them to transition more appropriately, but we want to actually see big distinct jumps between the different values that we make. Wiping the palette knife again, really good. Now, the sky color. And I can actually see the red influence in this pretty heavily. That's not good. You can see it over here too. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to scrape it away so that that doesn't end up in the mixture. Just by pulling that away already, this looks a lot cleaner. And then I'm also going to wipe these areas to get rid of the rest of the red that might be elevated enough, which just means it's lifted on the surface. That means that there's enough paint there to actually get into this and really distort things. I'm going to lighten this up. Get it close to this one. Maybe just a little bit more white. Okay, now I'm going to take a small portion of this and mix it in. Wipe the knife so that I only have what's in the pile and not add extra. And now this is definitely shifting in a direction that we can see in the photograph. And that's doing an even better job. So this is going to be the most influenced by the light color. I'll scrape that up, slide it over. It does look like it could use a little bit more of this in the mixture. So I'll throw a little bit more in there. Now we can see a big difference between these three. This is definitely influenced now by the ultramarine blue. Slide that over. Pull this out along here. That's the actual color without any of the ultramarine mixture in it. And I'm going to put this right here just as an extra color to play with. That's the local color without the sky influence. And where it drops to the side of the bottle, I'll use a little bit more of this than this right here, which is facing at an angle upwards towards the light source. All right, now the same thing with this color. I am going to cut this so there's a small portion of it for the side of the object, and then the rest of this is going to be influenced by the light. Now this is pretty dark. Remember, I made a lighter version right here, but this up here is darker and actually a lot closer to this value here. I'm going to mix the two of those into each other until the cerulean blue doesn't look as cerulean. The sky color should be distorting it just enough. All right. Now scrape that, bending the knife so that it doesn't touch all the other colors. And there's definitely a big difference between the two of those. Now finally, this color right here, up along the cone portion, we can definitely see some influence of the sky color. So I'm going to take a small portion of this, separating them out from one another, and then maybe add just a tiny bit more ultramarine blue to this to darken it down closer to this value. While this isn't as dark, this is probably what I'm going to shoot for right here, for that light color. Take some of this. Oops, well, that's okay. Mix these into one another. Now it is starting to lighten up because of the amount of white that's in this. So I'll take a little tiny bit of this again and a teeny tiny bit of this, throw both of those in there and shift it back towards the color of the blue, but it will never become that ever again because that ultramarine is also mixed in with it. Those are still different in value. A little bit more of each to darken it down further. Now they're a lot closer together. Maybe a little bit more of this. And those are the colors of the lit side of our blue object. Now for one dark, although there's reflected light in this, I'm just going to shoot for one dark for the shadow pattern. Use that straight out of the tube. Throw a little bit of this into it so that it's not straight out of the tube color and it leans towards what I'm seeing in the photograph. And then there's a hint of a warm in there. And instead of either one of these, because it's going to turn this really, really purple, I'm going to take some of this, the cadmium color, and throw that into it. That'll warm up this blue, darken the value, and get us a lot closer to what we see in the photograph. So again, warm shadows because we have a cool direct light. And as it turns even further, it gets a little bit darker. Just take a tiny bit more of this, mix those into one another, take this. So you can see now the cadmium took over and is causing this to look really muddy. Throw a little bit of that cerulean blue and the viridian green back into it, and that gets rid of the reddishness dominating. Even though this is still a warm, it doesn't look red anymore, which is what we don't want. We don't want it to look foreign enough that it doesn't feel like it belongs on that object at all. So there's my shadow color, my midtone, or my terminator color, midtone, and then the lighter values as they transition towards the light source. And that's the blue object. The next object is the yellow object, and you can see again I took a lot of time to clean off the palette here. I moved the blues over to here so they're out of the way, and there is blue on this surface, but it's not going to come off into the paint at all. And anyway, there is going to be a little bit of blue mixed in because of the sky color. All right, so the yellow, it's a light object, and I have to remember that. So I'm going to start with the white, and then I'm going to add a tiny bit of yellow to it. And that little tiny bit of yellow goes a long way, but we're nowhere near what we need yet. Now, instead of adding this to it, because that's compounding the amount of yellow, and I want to deepen it down just a little bit, I'm going to go over here. I'm going to add a little bit of red to it, making sure that there's not a lot on here. And this is going to deepen the yellow. And it could very well start turning to red if I'm not careful. Add a little bit of yellow back into it to make it more chromatic. But now the yellow is not a cool yellow. It's becoming a warm yellow. Now I need more. So what I'm going to do is take just a tiny bit more of this, mix it in with it. And then really pay attention to the gauge of this color. So is it staying yellow or is it shifting too much? If it starts to shift too much, that's when I can use the yellow-orange. So I'm using these colors sparingly, and I'm working them against each other based upon the yellow content of these two versus this one that has no yellow content in it at all. Because I don't want this to turn cool. all of a sudden. I want it to remain warm for as long as possible. Now, where I'm looking for the color is down at the base. The base is the darkest. The edge where the light and the shadow meet each other is really cool looking because of the influence of the light outside. I just want to make sure that this gets a good amount of the warm yellow, which is down at the base, and add a tiny bit more of the red into it. Warm it up. And if it becomes too red, which a part of it is right now, then I'll add back a tiny bit of yellow to shift it. So I'm playing color control, right? This is how I'm keeping the hue true to what I need, as opposed to just letting colors mix until I feel like it's the right thing. A little bit of orange, which has yellow in it, but not a lot of red. And I just need to be careful not that it doesn't start shifting into an orange direction too much. Maybe just a tiny bit more yellow and a little tiny dash of the red. That darkens the value. The red keeps it neutral, so it's not too cool, which that color is very cool. And it looks pretty yellow. Just a tiny bit more yellow and a tiny bit more of the red to darken the value. The red is darkening the value. As we can see, that just shifted into a darker yellow. And throwing a hint of this back in is going to lighten it up a little bit, but it's also going to shift the temperature back towards yellow proper. Now that looks really good. That's a lot closer to what we need right there. So there's a science to all of this. There's a definitive science to everything that we're doing here. It isn't just random chance. There's an understanding of how these temper each other, kind of like playing chords on a piano, how all those notes complement one another. That's what I'm doing here, is I'm playing it like a chord. Now over here, we're going to make a lighter version. Grab a lot of white here, throw that in. You can see there's a huge difference in temperature between the two of those. Darken the value. It's also going to shift the color towards red, adding the yellow into it. This will bring the chroma back and keep it in the yellow family. Lighter in value, darker in value. Now this one is going to definitely be affected by the sky color, so I think I'm okay with what I have there. Then I need a shadow hue. The shadow yellow has a lot of red in it because, again, cool light, warm shadows. So I'm going to go yellow, cadmium red, mix the two of those together. I'm going to use the alizarin for the darker value. This is definitely going to pollute it in a red direction. Throw some more yellow back into it to bring it closer to the yellow color. And then I'm going to jump over here to the viridian green and throw a hint of this in to shift it towards yellow ochre. Now this is in the yellow family. That yellow ochre is a darker yellow, but an earthen yellow. And I could probably still go another full value darker in the shadows. But we can see that it correlates with the other two colors. It's not so far off that it doesn't fit into the yellow family anymore. Now it definitely does, because of all the extra green that I threw in there. Alizarin crimson, darken the value down, and that neutralizes the green. But there's still enough of a yellowish base that still fits together with these. Part of it has more green because of the blue object bouncing green light into it. So I'm going to cut this puddle. I'm going to make a greener version over here. And that's the reflected light portion down towards the bottom of the object. Maybe just a tiny bit more green and a tiny bit of alizarin to darken the value even further. And then I'm going to throw more red into that. So I'm going to move these colors over to here. Bring this out so I can mix into it. Alizarin crimson with a tiny bit of the green. The green needs to be a part of this to help buffer the red so it doesn't become too much like a red color, a red hue. Because we still want this to fit into the yellow family. So the green is canceling the red out just enough. Throw those into each other. Now this is going to start shifting towards this one until I mix in just a little bit more of the alizarin, which will darken the value, redden it more. Now that's leaning towards the red family instead of the yellow family. Throw in more yellow, lightens the value, but shifts it back towards the yellow family. Maybe even a little bit more. There we go. Now bringing these next to each other, there's definitely a warmer and a cooler. And that's what I want. At the same value, a warmer version and a cooler version. Put those next to each other. Because those don't have the blue light in them, I don't need to think about them anymore. Warm versus cool. All right, now, it's getting rid of all that dark right next to these so it doesn't seep in and pollute the colors. I'm going to clean this off a little bit. Push it all over to the right for now. And now I'm going to add the sky color back into it. Which is this right up here. I'm going to add white into this. And that's definitely lighter than, oh, actually they're pretty close in value. Going to go just a little bit lighter in here. There we go. Take some of this, throw it into this. And I probably don't need all of this to be influenced because just like with this over here, I left part of it uninfluenced by the blue light and part of it obviously influenced by the blue light. That could still go a lot lighter in value. All right, this is pretty close right here. Although I have to say that it's probably still even lighter, but I'm wondering how much of that is the influence of the wall, which I can mix into that, and how much of that is photo distortion. Maybe a little bit more white just to get it even closer to what's seen in the picture. And it has shifted very cool. So I'm going to take a tiny bit of the red, throw that into it. Now that that's starting to lean into the red family, a tiny bit of yellow to neutralize the red. And I'm back to a darker value again. But there's a lot of that blue light in this, so that doesn't look pure yellow anymore. I'll go ahead and pull this over to the side. I'm going to take what's left up here. I'm going to put that next to it. So I have both of those to play with, even though I'm not going to use very much of this at all. I'll take this, which has a tiny bit of this in it, somewhere in between the two. And I'm going to pull part of that over. I have a little puddle of that. And then this, I'm going to add the blue into it. So some of this with the sky color as an influence, and some of it without. And this is a slightly darker color than this one over here. And you can see the varying degrees of temperature between the three of those. And I probably will have to back up the lens on this camera a little bit so we can see the full palette. There we go. Oh, no, we still have some of the palette close to me that we need to be able to see. There we go. All right, so now this one. Cut this in half. Take some of this and move it over to here. Darker value. I'm going to throw some of the darker blue into this to darken the value a little bit. Then take this and mix it in with this. And that is actually really close to what we see along the Terminator on the light side. So I don't think I need to mix any of that into it. I think I have enough. However, just to bring it back to the yellow family ever so slightly, I'm going to use a little bit of the orange, which is closer in value to what I'm working with here. Because if I take this, it's going to shift it and make it green all of a sudden. And we don't want it to be really green, although in parts of it, it does look green. Greener than yellow. So taking just a tiny bit of this, throwing it into this, shifting it from a warm to a cool because it's still on the lit side. Then I'm going to take all of this, slide it over to here. Now I have light, middle, and then shadow value of the yellow object. The pink object has some of the color of the wall in it, but it's lighter in value. It is lighter on the lit side of this object than the wall is darker looking. So this is where things get a little bit tricky as far as adjustments and making everything work. I need to reload the white. I just realized that I have very little white left, and what there is has a lot of pollution in it. I'm going to fill this area back up. You never want to paint with one of your colors absent. You want to make sure that you replenish everything. Like a factory, you don't want to have a low supply stock in any of the areas here. Because as you're making what you need to be plenty loaded with all the appropriate things that you're going to mix into one another. Otherwise, you're going to start second guessing yourself and using something else that shouldn't be. I'm going to make the Terminator color first. I'm going to add this red into it. And it is a very red object as opposed to a red-purple object, so I don't want it to look red-purple at all. This photograph really distorts the color of the object as well. It's a light value red. It's not a dark red at all. It looks darker red in the shadows. That's because it's the shadow side. And remember, warm shadows cool direct lights. So this is roughly the value of the object. Maybe even a little bit lighter than this. Just a tiny bit lighter. Testing it. If I like what I see, which I kind of do, then I'll make sure to add more white into this part of it as well, so that the entire pile is influenced all at once. Scoop it all back up. Now I'm going to cut a small portion of this away, add more white into it. This is the really lit side. Now this is going to be tough because, and what I should do is cut this even further. So I'll use this to go with the side that's facing exactly towards the light source. This will be in between, so light, middle, darker. Add more white into this. The less red there is, the easier it will be for me to lighten it up further and further. And then I can take that and look at it against the wall color, and it does look like it can still drop in, or lighten in value a little bit further. Next to these, though, you can definitely see a difference in value between the three. Then for the shadow side, I'm going to go ahead and mix that out down too so I can see them all together. I'm going to start with this, add a little bit of white into it. As far as value goes, that's pretty close, but there's all these different distortions in it. There's the yellow from this object, there's blue from this object. So there's a purplishness towards the bottom and more of an oranginess towards the top. And altogether it is darker in value and it doesn't have this much colorfulness to it. I'm going to add a little bit of alizarin to darken it down in value, but to also cut the red down a little bit more. Closer towards us, there's definitely an influence of like a blue in the room of some kind. And that's going to actually come from this color over here, which has more blue in it than the alizarin does. So now looking at these next to each other, looking at these next to each other, looking at these next to each other, this could still go darker in value. Now I'm going to use the Viridian green again to deepen this down and to prevent it from going too purplish. You will see it shift towards purple though, because the Viridian green is cool, not warm. But it's not dropping in value far enough. I'm going to throw a little bit of alizarin into this to help drop the value further, and you can see there's a drop in value, but it's still not that extreme as of yet. There's too much white in this color, and the white is preventing these darker hues from doing their job effectively. But the difference now between these is very similar to these over here. It's getting a lot closer. Throw a little bit more of the red to shift it back from purple, and throw a little bit of this in to drop the value. So now we have red back. Now, Viridian green. You can see already it just cooled everything off again. Now this is where I'm going to need to start cutting this pile so that I have the influence of the yellow object versus the blue object and so forth. But I am going to take a hint of this now, slide it over to here, leave that alone, take a portion of this, throw blue into it. This is closer in the value to this than this is. With this, I have to add more white, and there's already enough white in here, so this is going to suffice for what I need to shift it towards the purple. And there it goes. I have a nice purple hue. I want to make sure, though, that it's not necessarily purple. It has a blue reflected color on top of it. So a tiny bit of this red to bring it back to the red family. And then we can throw the blue on top as a reflected light later on. So there's the cooler version. Now the warmer version has the yellow hue mixed in with it. Closer to the value of this will be this. This has yellow in it. So I'm going to mix that into it. And the secret sauce for this, again, is going to be the Viridian green. Because the yellow isn't just a yellow hue, it's that kind of yellow-green mixture. I'll talk about that when I paint the picture, what I'm looking at on the different areas of the object, and why it sort of has that persona of color in those particular areas. And I still could add a tiny bit more of each of these to it. I'm going to leave that out for just a moment. Mix this in, then slide this in. The green would have shifted it in a completely different direction. I wanted to make sure that it stays kind of a red-yellow or a yellow-red before the green was distorting it. And the same thing as the lower half of the bottle. The upper half has this as the base, but a yellow reflected into it, like a glossy color. where you can actually see the properties of yellow. And the lower half is the same way with the blue. You can see properties of the blue mixed in with it. All right, so now I need to just add a little bit of the blue sky into these to bring them around to feel a little bit more like what we see in the photo. And just like I did with the yellow object, because of how light the value is, I want to first make sure that all this dark value is pushed far enough away from the area that I'm going to mix the lighter values together with to not throw things off too much, distorting them too much. Start with the white, add a little bit of blue, because I am going after that first. Cut that. Take some of this, mix them into each other. It definitely lacks red in there. I'll take a little bit more of this and make sure that red still exists in here, but you can definitely see this is cooler than this over here. And then I'm going to take this, leave it the way it is. Now with this one, can add just a tiny bit of a darker value to this, but just like I was doing with everything else, I want this to be lighter than this so it doesn't just shift it into purple. Take a small portion of this, mix them into each other. Now it's definitely gone lighter in value. I'll take a little bit of the darker blue, throw that in to drop the value. Now that it's darker in value, I can take a tiny bit of this and throw this back into it. But because it's darker in value than the blue is, it's not going towards purple. It's just remaining reddish in its content. I can still go just a tiny bit more red, taking some off of the blade before I mix this in. And there we are. And then I'm going to take this as is, move this over to here. Now with this one, do the same thing. I'm going to cut a small portion of it away. This is a lot closer in value to it. I don't need to do a lot of change here. But as you can see, I put in more blue than there was red. Oh, it swallowed it up really quickly. And it's too cold at this point. Factory's running low on the white. I should probably go out and pick up some more white. Add it back into the factory mixture. However, we're really close right now to getting this done. And I forgot, we still have that box and the little plant in the box yet to do. So I definitely need to add more white to the palette. Mix these into each other. Make sure that the red has some influence in this. Taking little tiny stabs at this, not grabbing a bunch. And it does take self-control to not want to just smash everything into each other to instantly come up with something. I'm just bringing in little parts at a time. All right. And now we have this, which is darker in value than that. Should probably add a tiny bit more white. Reload the palette. When I add the white back in, I want to make sure that there's a little bit of this red within it, so it doesn't just bleach this into a new kind of purple. The red that's added back in is going to help keep it in the same color family. All right, I'll move this over here. And there's a lot of it. And to not be wasteful, I think what I'm going to do is mix this all up, take a small portion of this, add it back in to lighten it up in value. But there's the red equivalent to this over here. Warmer, cooler. And then this. Warmer, cooler, warmer, cooler, warmer, cooler, and then coolest. That is the coolest color. All right. Now the white box next to everything else isn't really that white. It's actually kind of, in relationship to all the other colors, it has a more purplish look to it. It's something like this, but darker than this. I'm going to take this blue and mix it in with the white. Get close to the value that I see. Actually, I could take all of this in here and throw it in. And that gives me a nice dark value. Because while it is white, we're seeing it oblique to the light source, which means it's mostly in a halftone. There's a small edge of the white that's like a rim light to it. Now, of all the reds that I have up here, the one that I think is going to be the most complementary is the alizarin crimson. I'm going to mix that in with the blue. But I need this to shift back towards the blue more than the red. I'm going to use the ultramarine blue for that. And I'm just going to mix that in straight because I'm going to also darken the value a little bit more. And I'm looking at the mostly shadow portions. The box is also irregular in the surface. It has a little bit of a bow to it. So closer to the forward edge is more towards shadow than it is direct light. Now to just kind of neutralize this a little bit, the cadmium red, this is going to prevent it from going more purplish. See how that neutralizes the purple. And now a little bit more of the blue. And I can now add in the alizarin, but I'm going to put a tiny bit of that cadmium red in with it to make sure that it doesn't become too purplish. So a deep, warm blue is what we're seeing across a lot of the box surface. And take this, move it over to here. I'm going to take this, and I'm going to go lighter in value with it for the rest of the box. Lighten it up, but keep it in that bluish family. Yeah, I could still go a full value lighter. And then the flower is casting a shadow. Put those next to each other to see. Yeah, that's a pretty good difference in tonality or in value. But as far as the temperature goes, I'm going to take this and I'm going to add a little bit of red into it. Use the white to mix with this so it's not coming straight out of the tube. And then I'm going to blend these into one another, mix them into one another rather, not blending. There's no blending here, there's only mixing. And this is a warmer version. That might be a little too warm. You know what? I'm going to leave it. I'm going to leave it the way it is. If there's a discrepancy in its temperature, I can fix that on the canvas. Put those next to each other, warmer, cooler here. Darker right here. Now I'm an even darker for the cast shadow of the flower or the plant. And since the green is translucent, light is passing through it, so this color is going to have green in it as well. Now this shadow isn't that much darker than this right here. So add a little bit more white to it. Those are really close in value. I can still darken this down, and I'm going to darken it using this red. That's a lot. I don't need as much. So there's a darker version. Need more of this added into it, and I'll put a little bit of that in there to help neutralize the blue. Remember, warm shadows. What's missing now is kind of a purplishness to it, and I think that's where the alizarin crimson will be really useful. Now that looks really good as far as the shadow goes. That has a bit of the purplishness in it. It's warm. It's darker in value than this, although it could still, well, no, because of the translucency, the shadow isn't extremely dark. It is darker, and you can see there is a difference in value there, but it's not that much darker. Now, as it gets closer to the leaf, there's a lot more of the influence of this green color. I'm going to do a few things with this green. I'm going to add a tiny bit of this orange into it to warm up the green. So it's not a cool green, but a warm green. And I can probably add just a little bit more of the orange into it to warm it up further. Now I'll mix a portion of that in with this. And it's gone a little too green. There's still more blue dominance than the green hue. I'm going to throw a tiny bit of this back into it to knock back the green so it's not so potent and strong. And that actually looks pretty close. I would say that there's still maybe a little more blue in there, but that's okay. Again, once I go to the painting, I can make adjustments as needed. Well, with this here, I can start right into the leaves of the plant. Mix the two of these together. That looks pretty good for some of the green. There's 3 different greens in those leaves. This is one of them. Just making more of it so I have a bigger batch. So that's one of the greens. Then there's a green that has more yellow base to it. I'm going to neutralize it though with the orange so it doesn't become too acidic looking. That actually looks pretty good. I'm going to add a touch of the cerulean into it to cool it off a little bit more than this over here. And this is sort of like what it is in some of the shadow areas, but there's even a hint more of the blue mixed in with that. I'm going to go ahead and drop in maybe even just a tiny touch of the ultramarine to darken it in value. And then a little bit of the yellow, but making sure that there's a tiny bit of yellow-orange in there so it doesn't go too acidic on me. There's the shadow-ish green. Then there's the green that's in the direct lighting, and that has kind of a blue, like a blue hue to it. So there's the blue. Just being careful not to add too much into it. Then the green, using the yellow in this. If I add orange into this, it's going to warm it up, and I want to make sure that it stays cooled off. Lighter in value. Now, Viridian is a gutless color, so white's going to really dominate. I'm going to take some of the yellow and a tiny dash of the orange. Throw that into it. Then mix the two of these together. And it's missing the yellow content. So now I can throw yellow back into this. But because there's so much blue in here, the yellow is not going to dominate at all. All right, so there's one of the light greens, but let's add just a tiny bit more yellow to it to really make sure that it looks green. All right, so there's that. Now putting it over here, it definitely looks really cool. I'm going to take a small portion of this. I'm going to add a lot more yellow into it. That actually does look pretty good. It has a lot of blue in here still, but the yellow can still even have a little more yellow in it. There we go. So now we have a warm and a cool that are close to the same value. We have the darker values, and there is one in between this and this, which is warm like this. Lighter in value, but warmer. Warm. And with all this white that's on my palette here, I'm going to try to mix as much of it in as possible to lighten it up. Definitely looks lighter than this one. It has a little bit more yellow in it, which I'll neutralize with the orange. And that actually looks really close. This is on the far left leaf along its stem, or along the center of the leaf. And then there's a really dusty light green with a lot of the influence of the blue light in it. Very close to what you see here. You can mix this green in with the blue. And I would say that's pretty close right there. Although it could still go lighter in value. Take a portion of that, add white into it, and there's an even lighter version. And then the very last color is kind of the center flower thing that looks really earth tone. It has a brownishness to it. And there's two that I want to make sure I get. There's the lighter version, and then there's the darker version. The lighter version has a lot of warm in it. Has a yellow or yellow-orange. We're really close right here. I'm going to hint at a red component to it. Take a little tiny bit of this, maybe even a tiny bit of this, since they're the light value that I need. And then mix these into each other. So there's the lighter version. And then the darker version, the green and the red rose are going to drop the value. And the yellow-orange is going to keep it in the warm family. And you can see there's white on my palette knife that keeps mixing in with this, and that's going to keep lightening it up, and I don't want that. Put a little bit of red back into it, and then green again to drop its value and neutralize it more. Then add the red back in, and I'm going to add a little bit of cadmium with that mixture so it browns it out even further. And so this is in the occluded areas of that flower, or whatever we're seeing there, new growth or flower. And then there's a edge light that has more chroma to it. So there's the orange and then the cadmium red, mixing those together. So it has a colorfulness to it. And that's a lot. I don't really need that much. It's just these little tiny dashes of color. But there's my darks, there's my light. And then there's the greener side, which I can just mix one of these in with this, but darker in value. So I do need to still make one more variation. Since there's so much paint over here, I'm going to use that as my white. Add the orange into it. Throw a hint of a green hue into it. I'm going to lighten that green using these two as the value. Adjuster. Since those are opaque, you can use those like a white. That's pretty close. Has even more green in it. Drop the value. Warm it up. Drop the value. Warm it up again. Then mix those into each other. Now I have the value that I need for that shadow color in the leaf where the reflected light is. And this is again one of the buds on the flower. Then take this, add a little more orange into it to warm it up and shift it in temperature away from this one right here. So I have a warmer version and a cooler version at the same value. Put those next to each other to make sure we can see the warmer and the cooler. And then just for adjustment's sake, I'm going to make a more yellowish version. Adding a tiny bit of the orange to make sure, again, it doesn't go too acidic. And acidic is just the way that I'm describing its colorfulness. Doesn't mean that this has acid in it at all. All right, there are all the colors for the painting, minus the accents, minus the extreme highlights, and minus the ambient occlusions. This is everything that we need. Those will be added in using straight out of the tube colors at their darker value for the accents and the ambient occlusions, and probably using white with a slight tint to it, which I have here, here, and here. But if I need to make an even lighter one, I'll bring a little more white onto the palette. Okay, so you can see there's a line right across here, and I believe that's coming from this camera and tripod. I think, yeah, these are, yeah, it's actually the phone that's projecting a shadow onto the canvas. So I hope that that doesn't throw things off a little bit for you as you're watching it. And then there's a small shadow down here because of this block that I have underneath the canvas to keep it lifted up high enough so that you can see what's going on. Now I'm going to paint up here away from the bottom. So hopefully that bottom doesn't really play too much of a part in throwing things off as you're watching this painting develop. I'm just grabbing one of my brushes here. I'm going to use a small flat. You can see the size of that. It isn't that large. Now, when starting a painting, there's one of two colors to work with. You either start brown or you start blue. I'm going to start with blue. This is what I learned from Sebastian, especially when there's north light. A lot of the light in the halftones is coming from the sky, and the blue will mix in nicely to that. Brown would work really well on the shadow side, but we don't need to swap colors between the shadow side and the light side. I'm just going to keep everything in the blue family. Now there's the top of the cone, actually more like right here, of the yellow bottle. And this comes down towards the blue bottle. And this goes over towards the ball. This goes up through the planter box and then across the tops of everything over here. Center line for the yellow object. A little ball shape up at the top of it. Don't want to make it too large because then it's going to throw off the proportions of everything here. The cone, the length, the base, and then the actual pedestal that it's on. Creating the ellipse for this. The larger ellipse. And the height. Now, that just threw everything off because I dropped this down to the very bottom here. I'm going to open up the size of the canvas a little bit more, which is the nice thing about working this way, is I can actually make adjustments to the canvas size as I go. Blue bottle height is somewhere right around here. Center line for it. The very top as this intersects and comes over this way. Then drops down vertically. Looking at the height right here, making sure I don't exceed the length. See, this is the reason why we paint these smaller than the actual canvas size that we're working with, so that you can make adjustments to the size of the canvas if needed, if your composition gets thrown off a little bit, which unfortunately mine definitely got thrown off here. I'm going to come all the way down to this point right here. Move this over this way. And now find the pink bottle. Draw up and over and around first, and then I'll shrink this in here. Stair step it. Find the height of the neck. Throw a center line into that. Top of it is somewhere right around here. And then the arabesque shape on either side here. Then we have the planter box, which comes out to here. Drop this down. Find its height. This is too tall here. I'm going to raise that line up a little bit higher. Instead of getting really tricky with the flower, I'm just going to circle where the leaves are going to go. And then within the circle, group up some very simple masses, where each is going to be then the ball shape. And then recalibrate the compositional borderline. Cast shadows. Cast shadows over here. Over here. This should actually be lower than this. Cast shadow in here. Cast shadow here. And then there's small cast shadows, and then the form shadows on each of these objects. I'm going to draw the outline for them so I know where each of those falls. And then on the ball, there's the stair step, and then the opening of the ball right up at the very top. All right, so now I'm going to use a single brush for this entire painting. I'm not going to get caught up in swapping brushes or anything as I go. And I'm going to start with the shadow on this side of the pink bottle. Oops, just ran into the camera there. Shadow side of the pink bottle. Make sure that it's all one color, one value to begin with. And with the absence of the other colors, it will be very easy to see what's missing to place that back in. Big, quick, simple brush strokes. Don't get caught up with lots of little tiny pecking away brush strokes at all. There's no need for any of that. Shadow side of this. And I did forget to mix the ground shadows when I made the floor color. I can probably explain that as I come back and address it. This entire bottom is in shadow, although some parts are lighter than others. Just going to go ahead and block the whole thing in like that for now. And then there's a small hint of a shadow here from the box. It's more like a gradation than a shadow, but I'm still going to mark it out. Then the shadow side of the red ball. All down through here. The shadow side, or the shadow portion of the flower along here and up here, which does get darker and greener towards the top. I'll throw a hint of this green into it to differentiate the two of them. And then there is a half tone that sits along here. I'm just going to go ahead and throw that in because when I put the background in, I want to use that as a marker to make sure that the values are offset enough for one another. And then the blue bottle. Don't brush in too much like I was just doing there. You want to try to avoid doing that because it thins the paint and it weakens its color. And you have to go back in and add more back into it. So it just makes sense to fill everything with, once the brush is empty, instead of spreading it on the surface, go back and reload the brush instead. Just get more paint. The average shadow value on the floor plane is roughly, it's the same value as all of these, but it's more neutral. I'm going to have to mix that color really quickly. I just have to be really careful. I'm using alizarin crimson and ultramarine blue. And then to neutralize it, cadmium red, so that it's not too purple. And it does have, remember, it's a warm color because the lighting is cool. So I have something like this as the color. And that's probably going to be hard to see. It's kind of a deep purplish hue that will change from shadow to shadow because of the reflections of all the objects within the shadows. There's some of this color in this shadow. There's some of this color in this shadow right here. And then there's the wall color in these shadows over here. To start off with, though, we just use one simple flat tone. And just like I was mentioning with all of these, the absence of the correct extra adjustment hues will be very easy to spot when the shadow is one color and one temperature. And when you're comparing it back and forth, it becomes very obvious what's lacking or what's missing in it. All right, so that's all of the shadows of all of the objects. Now I'm going to put in the edge color along here. And then next to that, the colors in the light over here, then along here, up along here, and then the even lighter colors all over here. I'm leaving everything separated from each other. I'm not trying to mix the colors into one another to create a soft gradation yet. If anything needs to be adjusted, I'd rather adjust first before I have to mess with the gradations. Then the red ball, which I actually should have started with. Darkest to lightest is a good way to go when building everything out. That's really close to the same value as the shadow on the bottom there. And actually it's the same, it's close in all of those areas. Maximizing the amount of color I have on my brush, trying to get all of it off. And once I see it's becoming like a dry brush effect, Then I go and reload the brush. There's the light edge over here, which I'm just going to stamp in. Then moving on to the pink bottle, since I have red on the brush, it makes sense to just jump into this hue. Along this edge first, then along this edge, then out along here. I'm rotating the brush as needed, trying to pull everything in one brush stroke instead of getting, again, little tiny choppy brush strokes everywhere. Now in here, because of the line drawing, it is going to get a tiny bit muddy. Then way out over here. And the same thing along the edge here. The blue line is going to mix in with it. And that's easy to fix later. Don't need to get caught up in that right now. Those little nuances are easy to adjust. I'm going to put the side of this object in. And this is really telling right along here if the values are correct in relationship to each other. It seems to be okay here. Loading the brush again. Now to the yellow bottle. Because the color keeps weakening as I pull down, meaning that there isn't a lot of paint on the brush, I keep reloading it. And this down here actually has more of this in it than the shadow color or value. And then down in here, it's really colorful. There's light peeking in along in here, but I'm going to brush stroke it in several times to help it mix with the shadow color that's in there. And then I'll make adjustments to that later. Now back up to here. Through here. And then the little ball at the top has a tiny hint, and what I'm just going to do is fill the whole thing with that for now. And then I'll go back along its edge with a slightly lighter value once I have the wall put in. So this yellow will definitely be affected by that blue line. It'll start to shift to green a lot more than it needs to be. I need to be careful about that. All right, now the wall in the background. Starting with this side. There are those blue lines I want to paint over first, just to make sure they're eliminated. Now this is one of the colors that I might run out of. I know I made a lot of it, but there's a lot more. The canvas size grew because my composition grew quite a bit more than what the original composition was because of my drawing problem. This comes down to about right here, and then the floor begins. I'm going to take that out over this way. There's a little bit of mud in there, so I wiped it in to the surface. And once I get to about right here, that's when it shifts in value and in temperature. Hopefully everything works out where I have enough paint to cover this surface. What I'm doing is I'm rubbing out the lines that are underneath there. But what that's doing is it's loading up my brush so I have more paint on it. Because this is not a very colorful color, I can definitely exhaust it a little bit more. So now I'm going against what I said earlier about, not scrubbing into the surface very much. Stamping the brush down in a few places, because the brush has a lot of paint within the ferrule. because the paint is sliding into it. So I want to make sure to use that part of the brush to get out the paint, or remove the paint from that part of the brush before it starts to slip too far into the ferrule. Because that means later on, I'm going to end up with hairs breaking off on the brush if I let paint slide down into that part of it. Rotating the brush when needed to make sure that my brush strokes fit properly. Trying to cover up those blue lines wherever I can. And then there's the little cut-ins over here. Hopefully I have enough paint to cover those, because I'm definitely getting low on this color. Probably going to end up with a little bit of mud. And the mud is coming from the blue line. It's basically dirtying it up a little bit. Which again, I can just mix more color later to fix that. All right, now moving over to this part of the wall. I'm going to shift temperature. There's a lot of paint on my brush right now, so I can definitely spread it out. And I just reloaded the brush. Now, these colors that I made for the wall, I definitely did not make enough of them. And when you're done with your painting, there should be a lot of leftover color from everything else. That is the way that it should work out. To the point where you could practically make a couple more paintings with what you have left over. My intention is to always use up whatever I can outside of the painting that I was working on. But unless I'm making another painting like this one with these colors, I don't really know what I would use them for another painting. I guess I could make this again a second time just to put in more practice. Or I could just make up some invented picture. But when you're done with the painting, you will be sacrificing some color. You made more than enough to make sure you didn't have to jump back and forth between mixing paint and painting the picture. Yeah, it's pretty close right there. Have a Mona Lisa horizon line. One side of the objects, it's higher than the other. Need a floor color right along inside of there. Now the floor color. Laying it on really thick here, especially where I need to cover up those outlines. Got to cut into the shadow here a little bit. Now there's a dozen ways to remove paint from a surface, so don't feel weird about having to smear a color around that shouldn't be in those places. It's pretty easy to remove it if it's absolutely annoying. And in some cases, for the painterly look, it may actually work out really well. Laying it on thick through here. Laying it in thick over here. Now I'm shifting to the cooler temperature as it moves over this way. And then there's little tiny pockets of light right in here and right up there, which I've already laid this one down, but do need to cover up a bit more of that. All right, so now the biggest areas of the painting are laid out. Now for the leaves. I'm just, because this is so small, I'm trying to do each of these in one pull. I'm not too concerned with the drawing. With the color exercise, the drawing isn't that important. It's our ego that's talking to us when the drawing doesn't quite look right. And I'm silencing mine for the moment so that I can actually enjoy just laying paint down instead of critiquing myself and getting too caught up in why it doesn't look exactly like the picture or things of that sort. That stuff doesn't matter. What does matter is that you've learned how to see the color and you've mixed the appropriate values and the appropriate hues in their proper chroma and so forth. The dark accent of that flowery thing on the inside, the underside, the lit portions, which are going to mix with the green if I don't lay them lightly onto the top of the picture, which is what I'm trying to do. Just skimming over the top to lay in the color. Now for the accents and the occlusions, which are going to be straight out of the tube hues, and the highlights. The highlights, I've got enough light colors that I've already mixed, like the edge up along here is definitely really light. The edge along here is really light. I need to load the brush for that edge. So I have a big glop of paint on my brush that I can run along that edge. There's some light edges that travel through here on the ball. And then for the distortions in all of the shadows of each object. Down over in here, there's going to be more green included in the shadow from the blue bottle. And I'm just basically going to use the green pretty much that I've mixed for the leaves and a hint of blue. And I'm going to rake that across the surface here. I'm going to do the same thing from here upward. And then I'm going to lay a little bit of the shadow color back over that because it opened up the value too much. And the shadow color is going to help temper that. Then as it goes up higher along here, it's warmer looking. So I have that warmer mixture here, but also lighter than that. I'm going to mix in just a little bit of orange into it and throw that into the mixture and drop in a nice brush stroke up there and up along here. And here there's a little bit of reflected light. Not sure what's off camera, but we can see reflections in here, and that's too light in value. But because the color that's underneath, if I press down really hard and just stamp into it and then smudge it into the surface a little bit, you can see that the color underneath starts to darken it down. And where it doesn't, I'll take the shadow color back in and push it over the top of that. And that'll help temper it. Now over in here, there's blue. I'm going to take the blue that I've made and I'm going to lay that in, which it actually needs to be less chromatic. I'm going to gray it down a little bit. Now that's too bright. I need to be really careful. I'm going to scrape at it to remove most of the top color. You can see now that looks pretty good. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to lay it in where it's too light. I'm going to take the brush on its side and I'm going to scrape that off. And it blends in perfectly the way we're seeing it in the photograph. Then I have a hint of that happening up here. Do the same thing, scrape it in. Then over onto the side here, have a little bit of the yellow color, which actually looks really yellowish. Throw it in right there. and right up in here, as well as the underside of this here. And the yellow disappeared because I rubbed too much of it in. So I'll just take this brush again and pull one brush stroke down along here. And then with the side of the brush, scrape at it. And where things get a little too distorted, I can always come back in with the shadow color and make an adjustment to it. Then I do need to put the wall color in again along this edge here, just to cut the shape so it creates that arc. And then there's a bit of a shadow right over here. Because it's a color study, I'm not going to get too caught up in accuracy. This is bothersome right along here. I'm going to take a bit of the light color of this and move it over just a tiny bit more through here. And of course that darkens it and dirties it. But running the brush parallel to the surface, I can cover that up really easily. So the angle of the brush definitely helps you with certain effects that you're trying to paint into. Then the shadow in here has a little bit more green right up at the top. And then it purples as it reaches down this way. I'm going to put a hint of this back in right here. And a bit of the light color right over here at the corner to remove that little blue chunk of paint. Then back down to the floor, get rid of the edge here. Soften this edge over here. Soften the edge right around here. And I'm going to soften the edge over here. Do the same thing across this back edge. I'm going to spread this shadow out just a little bit more. And then fill this with the shadow here. And then warm this side up just a touch. Now, if you want to soften any of the edges, what I recommend you do is create using a little bit of this and a little bit of this together, mixing them into each other, running that down the edge here, letting that brush stroke overlap the others. Now the problem is what happened right there was that the lighter color got more, was spread out more than the Terminator is darker. So it actually broke the relationship between the light side and the shadow side. So I went back in with the shadow color and darkened it down just a little bit more so that it creates that Terminator again. Now the same thing with this edge right along here. I'm going to take the shadow version and the light version, mix the two into each other a little bit on the palette, and then run that down this edge. And I made sure to mix it even more than what I had on this one, so it doesn't do the same problematic thing again with it. With a little bit more blue, it cools it off just a touch. And now we have a nice transitional color. Now for the accents, which are the really, really dark colors, those are what you would call ambient occlusions. For the one that's underneath here, I'm going to use ultramarine blue straight out of the tube. And I'm going to run the brush along the corner of it right here, around the bottom from the shadow side into the light. For the base of this right here, I'm actually going to use black. For the shadow side under here, I'm going to use black, but I'm going to put a hint of the ultramarine blue into it. And I'm also going to use that same color for right along the inside edge here. Darken that down more. And then for the underside of this, I'm going to use Viridian Green with alizarin crimson. I'm going to make a kind of a dark brown. And these colors just correspond really well with the objects that I'm putting them in. This is opened up a little too much up here. It's out of perspective. Now, that shouldn't matter. I shouldn't be too concerned with that. However, I am being a little bit particular about it. Lay that down over the top of it. That's the background hue. And that works right there. That fixes the shape. I don't need to concern myself with it too much anymore. Fix the edge over here. Then on the ground shadow here, I'm going to use a hint of green because that green has enough yellow in it for the wall, but it's a darker value. And I'm going to do the same thing back here. Only I'm going to mix the green with a little bit of blue and then scrub that in to lighten the value, and then do it again one more time to lighten that up. And down in here, there's the yellowish hue mixed in with it. I'm going to use the shadow yellow. And then with this one down here, there's red in it. You use the shadow color from the bottle, especially right here at this edge. Cross through here. And then as it moves over this way, the blue bottle starts to influence the shadow a little bit. I'll throw a little bit of blue in there, but it looks like it actually used greenishness because it doesn't feel that blue. And the reason is the blue is mixing with this red, causing it to become a brownish color, but brown with a blue dominant quality to it, and that makes it greenish brown. Now I'm just looking to see what else I can make adjustments to. The shadow back here is too tall. I'm going to cut it in a little bit using the ground color. And it's a little bit on the sharp side. I'm going to soften that up a little bit. The shadow here doesn't spread out far enough. I can actually grow that shadow a little taller. Then in here, that's a little bit too hot. The blue travels up even higher into it. I'm going to slide this blue up a little farther and slide that in using the side of the brush. Kind of crush the yellow in there. So I'm going to take a little bit more of the deeper mixture of the yellow with the shadow, throw a hint of that back in right there. And that gives me a better balance. And then the last thing I'm going to do is bring in the light over here on this side of the opening of that bottle or vase, whatever that is. And then the last thing, if anything, is there's a blue halo around the edge of this that I'm not that fond of. I'm going to take a little bit of the background color and run it along that edge just to knock it back a little bit. Now that bottle blends right in with the wall, and I need to pop it forward just a touch by making it a little bit lighter on that edge. And because this is paint, the best way to actually fix this is to go darker on the wall. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to go just a little bit darker on the wall, right along in here. I'm using the floor color because it's darker in value. I'm going to spread that out so you don't notice that I've made it darker right up against that edge. So it doesn't become too obvious, but that helps pop the bottle a little bit further. So instead of trying to go whiter and whiter, I'm going darker with the background. And there's our color study, and we're really close with everything here. There's a few things like this could be a little bit cooler along this edge. I'm going to take one of the blues that I've made earlier and mix it in just a little bit with the local color of the red, and then spread that down the edge just to cool it off a little bit. And then this edge is a little bit too sharp. I'm going to blur that one, and that's our painting. Now, as you can see, there is logic to everything that we do. Everything has an answer to it. When you're confused about something, break it down into its science, the science of light, and what's happening because of that science. Now, what I mean by this is there's an optical thing happening here. The optical thing is influenced by the light source. So where's the light source coming from? What temperature is the light? Once there's an answer for that, then looking at each object, what is the local color and what is its temperature based upon the influence of that light source? Knowing what our light source is, what temperature is it? And we know now that the shadows will be the opposite temperature of that. Then each local color needs to be defined. How dark or light are each of those local colors? And what do we need to do to make them correct in temperature by influencing it with the light source or with the shadow side? And then you have each object that you can compare to one another. How light or dark are each of these objects to one another, and have you achieved that same lightness or darkness in the picture space? If their values correspond, the picture will have the same kind of extreme to it. Now, you're not going to make everything perfect from what you see in the photo, nor should you worry about that. It's getting close enough so that you have something that feels right in terms of the overall feeling of the picture space. Like I can put a little bit of red in here from the red bottle, a little bit of an influence of it, and let that gradate over this way. I can do the same thing up high here. Put a little bit of red in that. So it goes from warmer to cooler because of the reflected light coming from this. And that links these two objects together better so that they don't separate from each other. They start to work in towards one another. And that's what the bounce light is doing between all of these objects. They're all working with each other to create the overall illusion and the effect that you see. I can even go a little bit darker in value and cooler back here along this edge, which will make this side even brighter. And the photo does show that. It is darker and cooler over here. And then it gets lighter as it spreads across the canvas. That same thing is happening up here in between these two bottles. It's a little bit darker and cooler in there. And then it's lighter and brighter over here. Wouldn't necessarily say warmer, but it definitely does feel brighter over here altogether. And it's cooling off over this way. I don't know what's over on this side of the picture, but something over here is influencing all of these to have a little bit of bluishness in them. But we do know that with the lights being indirect and cool from the blue light outside, the shadows should be warmer altogether over here. And as values darken, so does the color of the light darken. And this whole thing is lit by the blue sky, so it does make sense that we could use a darker blue over here as opposed to a shadow color, since this is not going into the shadow, it's just pushing farther away from the light source. So again, logic. Logic and the science of what's happening is going to help you solve all of these problems. And the more you get involved in trying to solve the logic, the easier it will be to paint the picture and make it feel like the subject matter that you're trying to copy. And then remember one more thing here. We don't want an exact copy. We want it to be artistically copied. But when we're learning, we want to make sure that we have a goal. In this case, I was trying to match the temperature and the values of each thing so that when I look at this and I look at the reference, they are comparable to each other. And if they're close, then I've done my job today. I've done a good job matching the values and matching the temperatures, which means I've learned something for the day. And part of that learning came from all the mixing that I did. It was, in fact, the mixing that helped me make this picture work so quickly. Because having a logical answer for everything by doing the mixture when I get up here to the painting, all I'm doing is just painting the picture now. I don't have to think about anything more. I have all the colors laid out and I have them already pre-mixed based upon what's happening in the logic of the light up here. And that is the answer to the problem I'm trying to solve. I just need to assemble it together to see if what I did works. And as you can see here, it works pretty good. There is one more little shadow I want to put in on the underside here. One more little edge just to help cast the shadow a little bit further on the undercut of this. All right. Thank you for sticking around. I hope you learned something from this lesson. Good luck with your studies, and I'll see you in the next one.